Is there anybody out there?
The lights in the night sky. Skywatchers. We're watching. We're watching.
Did you see that?
Skywatcher
on Skywatcher Radio. Skywatcherradio.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Deborah Jane East, and we're here in the Skywatcher studio in beautiful downtown Pilot Mountain. And I am so pumped for my interview this evening. As a lot of you know, I'm a great movie buff, and I've been following this movie for quite a while. And I'm happy to say that I have someone that you're going to be greatly interested in. So I'm going to read his bio here so that we can go ahead and get into the interview. Chad C. Meek is the writer, director, and executive producer of Giant Rock the movie. He has taken his own early childhood UFO abduction experiences and time spent with his eclectic uncle, George Van Tassel, who was born in 1910 and died in 1978, to bring the first of 3 episodes about the people who gathered at a place called Giant Rock. It's located in California's Mojave Desert. Mr. Meek brings over 30 years of solid experience in the natural resource industries to the Giant Rock the movie franchise. Giant Rock has received letters of interest from iconic A-list stars. Hello, Mr. Meek. How are you?
I am perfect, Deborah. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I am thrilled because as long as I can remember, I have always been a big movie fan, especially of science fiction. And you know, I've loved that. I love Star Trek and all that stuff, but if there's anything more that I love than science fiction, it's movies based on real events. And I'm just thrilled to be able to interview you, and I can't wait to hear everything. I'm as excited as all of my listeners probably are.
Well, I can tell you, sister, you are going to love Giant Rock the movie because I'm telling you, you will be, 2 things are going to happen. One, you're going to sit down in the theater, and then the next thing, the lights are going to come on, and it's time to go home. And you're going to take this movie home with you, and you're going to remember the characters because they have souls. Unlike a lot of the movies that we've been seeing lately, which they're very, very colorful, they're beautifully done, the CGI, the computer graphics are wonderful, but one of the things that they're lacking is a real soul, real feeling. And I think that we've got it. I've had enough feedback with my screenplay and with it, I think we've got it. And I think if we just matched up some of the stuff that some of the more fancier films are up to, which we will, we've got all kinds of ethereal scenes and UFOs and what have you. I think it'll look, but at least it will make sense and not be. It'll be kind of a roller coaster ride, but not like a quick one. So that's it for my plug, and I am extraordinarily proud to be able to do this work, not only for the legacy of my late uncle, who was a great man, and my other members of my family, but just for the people out there that sacrifice so much, because if it wasn't for them doing some of the heavy lifting and really exploring places at a time where it really was not acceptable, they really did the heavy lifting for us. And so now I can get on Deborah Jane East's show. I can talk, I can just talk freely about my experiences. I can talk about, with you, freely without being ashamed or ridiculed. Well, I may get ridiculed here and there, but that's okay.
Yeah, we all go through that because, as you know, UFOs, people sort of raise their eyebrows. Even here in Mayberry, I get a few raised eyebrows, but it's just wonderful that you're able to pass on this legacy of your uncle. But first, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your early experiences? Because I understand that you had an experience with a UFO.
Well, I had several of them. One, I was in an environment where there was a tremendous amount of activity out at Giant Rock. And, we came from very humble circumstances. My parents weren't, they had all kinds of, problems, what have you. So we ended up always living with my grandmother. And my grandmother lived right next to George and Eva out there at Giant Rock. So we were kind of crowded in there. But as a little kid, I would see all these people, and very important people out there with my uncle. And at the same time, there was all this activity with the various UFOs and sightings and things like that, because he was the original UFO channel. He actually channeled these, which I don't know if your guests understand what that is. He would literally signal them through his ritual that he would do, and he actually learned this from a man named Frank Kreitzer. And so the UFO activity had been a lot. So as they were flying by, they saw this little kid out there named Chad C. Meek, and they wanted
Wow.
and they wanted to talk to me. But again, I mean, I was a funny little kid. I used to stand up, and I was always asking questions. One of the times I stand on the top of my grandmother's old beat up Airstream trailer that was just out there. It was almost it was falling apart. They'd used it when they first came out there when they were building her house. And I would just stand up there on top of it. I'd look at these, alligator clouds that would come out there. The sky was just so rich and beautiful. And I would be up there, and I'd just say, hey, what's up there? God, are you out there? Funny thing is, I always heard voices and things like that. So I was kind of a touched little human being anyways from the start. Yeah, I did have an experience out there. I was abducted. I was in a room with two of my brothers, and I was teleported through a glass window to a ship that was about 25 feet outside my grandmother's house. And they had brought me in, and later we had essentially identified them as the Greys, which has been a species of UFOs that's done a lot of that kind of thing. A lot of people have experienced them. There's been some estimation that there have been almost 4 million abductions in the United States. That was done by a Harvard professor, as far as that. So I was one of them. And they told me two things telepathically, and they had put some instrumentations in me, and I really don't know what they were doing, as far as this. They told me it wouldn't hurt and that I wouldn't remember the event. But they actually, both those things were not true. The next day I had a really high fever. They took me to the doctor because they couldn't understand it. Perhaps maybe they put something in me that was doing something to my body. Another thing is I stuttered profusely. I couldn't keep a straight sentence for weeks and months. I couldn't complete a sentence. So there was something that had dramatically affected me. But that was one of many. I had other ones. I had an attempt on a swing set that literally they were pulling me up and I would just not let go. And they finally let go of me. And I went down because these were frightening experiences for a small child. But then I had other instances where I'd be gone for hours. And people would be looking for me out in the desert. And it's kind of scary when you have a kid missing out in the open desert because it's...
Exactly.
Yeah. And so then I'd show up. And sometimes I'd get disciplined for wandering off, and I didn't wander off. I just wasn't that kind of kid. And I had a hard time, expressing what was going on because I really didn't want to... in fact, in one of the parts in the movie, one of the scenes there is me talking to my uncle and another person, and I was just kind of razzing my uncle, and I didn't want to really admit that he had any belief in them, but I would tell my uncle I didn't believe in UFOs or spacemen, and I would tell him that I would kind of dance around and tell him, well, I think you're not well in the head and not this and that.
Oh my gosh!
I just obnoxious little kid, and I knew different, and he knew different too. That was the thing. But he took his glasses off and he looked at me. He says, "I go, I don't believe in those." And he goes, and he put his glasses down. And he looked at me with those eyes. And he says, "You will, boy, you will." And I started to bawl. I started to cry because it was just so impactful. I said, so I stopped messing around that way.
And your uncle had piercing eyes because I've watched some of his speeches and stuff, and that is the one thing that really stuck with me is how piercing his eyes was. So I can imagine that had quite an effect on you.
Well, it did, and you're absolutely right. And I've had the same, I have some of the same footage that maybe you've saw and what have you. And when he would speak, it was with such authority. It was amazing. I'd never seen anything like that. And I look back at my life, and I told people, I haven't looked up to a lot of people. In fact, outside of my uncle, I've never seen anybody that I was just not only physically but just generally impressed with this persona. And I think he was just a man of destiny, and he had a message, and he had something to do on Earth here at that time period. And what has occurred is, I read some of his works, look at some of his words are more true today than they were 50 years ago. And he was so far ahead of his time, he just stuck out like a sore thumb. Even today, he would be impressive today, but there's a lot of people out there. But if you can imagine during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s for this man out in the desert to come out with this information, and he was world-renowned. I ran into people in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, ran into people in Tokyo, Japan, Hong Kong. I ran into rocket scientists. I had directors of my own company out of New York that were followers of him and his words. And so, and these are things that I've just kind of, and then since, of course, I've done the movie, I've had all kinds of people contact me and say, wow, I knew him, and I'll tell you this experience, and this was happening. So it's really, the story gets better, as I get older and the more information I know about him.
Wow. Well, you spoke about that he was ahead of his time. When I read the bio about your uncle and everything, and it talked about his channeling, it reminds me of what people do today, and they call it CE5. Are you familiar with CE5?
CE5, right.
Yes, and it's exactly the same thing. So he did it way before CE5 was even cool.
Yeah, what it's so funny. He was talking to Life magazine in an interview, and they were trying to figure out, well, how do you contact these, extraterrestrials, these entities out there? And he says, and how do you contact so many of them? He says, well, it's just like a channel. Hello, there was the name. So actually, the first word that came to this kind of thing, this kind of activity, is channel, and it is attributed to my uncle George Van Tassel. So that's a little bit of trivia there, but and it was innocent. He says, well, it's like turning a channel, So they said,
wow. So
now he was the UFO channel, and it really isn't really true so much per se, but when you're trying to explain exactly what he was doing, it was really more like data transfer. He would literally get zipped with information, then he would in fact process it out as far as in real time. And there were conversations going back and forth at times, but usually that wasn't how it occurred. One of the most important things that he had done, and this is part of the thing that is just intriguing as far as his just his courage that he had, and incidentally, he was a kind of a reluctant messiah, anyways, with some of this stuff. It wasn't something that he was particularly comfortable with, and one time he was told that the extraterrestrials and the Council of Seven Lights, which is this entity that he was talking with, told him that this above-ground nuclear testing had to stop because it was not only destroying our own atmosphere and people and generations to come, but that it was destroying parallel universes. And that's uncanny because now with quantum physics and in science, they talk about these parallel universes like it's a normal thing. Well, they were explaining this to him, that these atomic hydrogen bombs and all this stuff, they were creating tears in these parallel. They were not only destroying our own. So what does he do? He sends out a telegram to the president and the Truman administration and all the military people and newspapers, Life magazine, you name it. He just sent telegrams out saying, well, he was told to do this, and that to prove it, that there'd be a flyover of Washington, D.C. And sure enough, July 12th to July 19th, 1952, one of the biggest flyovers of UFOs ever reported in this country. They essentially stayed over Washington, D.C. And
it blew me away when I read that. That blew me away because I didn't know that. And I went, oh, my God, I can't believe that. I mean, how could anybody not believe him after he predicted that?
Well, they did. the government, he became sort of. Well, first he was when Eisenhower came in, he was trying to explain to them with the Eisenhower administration. He actually talked to Mamie and Ike, about it, and then they all got very nervous around him, and so he was eventually put on America's Most Dangerous Persons list. They looked at him as a threat, because he was talking to these extraterrestrials directly, and they felt that it should be a governmental thing, and that they were taking their authority away. But they didn't, it's not like, if you can imagine this intelligent life form, they wouldn't know the difference between a president and a bum on the street. I mean, it's kind of like
wow.
But so they didn't like it much, and they really made and that's in the movie too. We show that, and eventually a group was formed called COINTEL Pro that literally who took all the that went after the part. They were FBI part that literally went ahead and tried to discredit people. They went after John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, all the Vietnam War protesters. All of them. They would literally do some incredibly ruthless things. In regard, trying to discredit them. And so he was actually a victim of some of that later on, which was really too bad. He thought, because of his war record in aerospace, he'd worked with Howard Hughes. He'd helped build the air defense system, and was quite acclaimed at that. He just thought that he was one of the boys. Well, he wasn't. He found out he wasn't. He wasn't one of the boys. There was a different club, and so at any rate, he had the consequences, but he never backed down from them. There was no way that he was.
He never did. Yeah, everything I read, he was really brave. And I met Julie Eisenhower when she was campaigning with David, and if I knew all that stuff was going on, I would have quizzed David. I had no idea.
She would have. I have another friend who actually. A lot of people contact me, and you just don't know, because Giant Rock has been this 8-story freestanding boulder, which was carved out in the middle of the desert, and it stands out there almost like a giant well, huge well out there. But I find out that Giant Rock means so much as a touchstone to so many different people. And this one guy, and we've become friends. He actually knows her, and I'm going to try to find out exactly how much information she was privileged to. I don't know whether she was, but she's actually a UFO. I understand she's actually a UFO person. That actually,
oh my gosh, you just gave me an incredible bit of information. So that might be an aspect that you should,
follow
seek
up.
out.
Yeah, and follow up. But anyways, it's we're going to get this out, and the movie out, and we want to get some, our budget. It originally started off. My original budget was $15 million. I thought I could get it done for that. And then we had some, so-called experts from Warner Brothers. They were attached to it for a while, and they were kind of pushing this thing more into. One of the producers, he was he had worked on Pirates of the Caribbean and Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, and so he kind of had a preconceived notion as far as what Giant Rock should be and what have you. And so some of the changes that they want to do, I just was not comfortable with. Number one, I don't think that people want to see Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. I think people are looking for something substantive with, like I said before, with the soul. So we kind of had a little bit of, fight, a little bit on the whole thing. So anyways, they all, a year ago, they mutinied away. It actually been a year ago, they mutinied away as far as that, because I wouldn't want to do, create that movie, and I have to create my movie. It's I wrote the thing.
It is. It's your movie, and it's your family, and I think that's what your uncle would want.
Well, I think so too. He has been pushing me, And I come to believe that no one really ever dies. I mean, we know science says that atoms are indestructible. We're composed of atoms. So, but I've had some incredible events with him through the years that we could do 3 other shows as far as how he has contacted me, kind of nudged me. So I think that he has a lot to do with what I'm doing now, and so I'm just kind of going with it, and it's some days it's tough. It's tough to move on and what have you, but every day I think, I always feel like I'm a little closer, and I know when this thing is ready to come out, it's going to be perfect, and people are going to love it.
I think so too. Could we talk a little bit about George's early life? And he started out actually as a flight engineer.
Well, actually started out as a mechanic.
Wow.
He actually went from Jefferson, Ohio, in 1930, and he hitchhiked across the United States. Before that, he'd got his pilot's license. He was one of the youngest people with his pilot's license in Ohio. And he was always tinkering and reading. He was just an amazing self-educated man. But he ended up hitchhiking out there to Santa Monica, California, and where he went to work for his uncle as a mechanic. And that's really where the story began, because in his early life, a man named Frank Kreitzer came in and needed some car repairs, and told him that he had a vision about this great stone, and was told to go out there to start something, do some mining. And so anyways, one thing led to another, and my uncle was just mesmerized by this German guy and his story about this, and he was just, and so him and his uncle took $31 out of their own pocket, which, you got to remember back in that time, $31 was like a fortune, as far
it was a lot of money.
A lot of money, yeah. And then they stuck a bunch of canned goods and some, they canned everything back in those days, or bottled it, whatever, threw everything they could in the back of his old Exeter that they'd actually fixed the transmission on for free. And
that was a good deal.
Yeah, and sent him out. Well, the promise was that Frank Kreitzer would cut him in on the mining, riches that they were going to get, and all that stuff. But so Frank Kreitzer went out there first in about a little after 1930, and so my uncle had kept in contact with him as a mechanic, and then he got a job, with various. Aerospace, because he was just a gifted mechanic, and so he went from flight inspector to quality control engineer, et cetera, to really number 2 with Howard Hughes, and they actually became at Hughes Aircraft, became very good friends, and Howard liked him because he was an innovator, and Howard was too, and so they kind of hit it off, pretty good, and then in 1947. After doing it, and it was tough because my uncle had always been going out there during the years with the family, with my Aunt Eva and my cousins and my grandmother. It was kind of a festive place to go. It's about 100 miles from where they were in Culver City, so they went out there. And so he'd been kept in contact. Same time, this Frank Kreitzer, who was a devotee of Dr. Rudolf Steiner and Nicholas Tesla, would always talk about all these various high-tech things, and this Frank Kreitzer was brilliant in his own right, and so he kind of taught him a lot of stuff. He was very metaphysical, as far as that. And then my uncle had his own vision about that he was to go out there in 47, and so he drug my aunt, my cousin, out there in the middle of the desert to go live inside of a rock, at least until they could build another house out there. And so he did. He took over. There was a dry lake out there, which is a natural landing strip, and so they built a restaurant out there. And so that's what they did. And they, from 47 on, and that's essentially what he did. And each year he would hold these huge UFO flying conventions, which I hope you've got a chance to see some photos of that.
I did.
Yeah.
And he did an incredible feat back in those days, because even some of the UFO conferences now can't pull in 11,000 people.
No, they can't. And, he was such a draw to that, and people from all over the world would come. It wasn't just local. people from New Zealand. Bruce Cathy ended up coming. Captain Bruce Cathy ended up coming from New Zealand. I mean, you people from the UK, and they would go to this annual event out there. So and I remember as a little kid, I'd see them start to come. I'd see the dust because it's all dirt roads, and we're out there out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden you see this trail of dust come out like a bunch of wild Mustangs rolling out to you. And there were cars and trailers and station wagons and all that stuff.
It actually, when I looked at the pictures, it reminded me of the scene in Contact, with Jodie Foster. You remember when had the caravan and everybody from all over the place. They were out there in trailers and on flatbeds and all this kind of stuff. When I saw those pictures, I thought, wow, he really was way ahead of his time. He developed that kind of following for his events.
Yes. He had a monthly newsletter, and of course, he always spoke at various venues, colleges. He was a regular on the old Long John Neville show, which eventually Larry King took over. And so he was there, and he would debate with Jackie Gleason about the existence of extraterrestrials. It was really kind of funny how some of the conversations that would come up. Incidentally, Jackie Gleason, who was originally tried to be the skeptic, we find out was this fervent believer in extraterrestrials. In fact, if you saw one of his old houses, it was designed as a spaceship.
And I actually read that him and President Nixon had quite a few conversations about UFOs.
Well, to the point where it's rumored, and of course, we live in a really crazy world with all this stuff here. It's rumored that Nixon actually showed him a recovered alien body. I think it was at a Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. So and then after that, you could just tell because Jackie Gleason, he was he was no longer the skeptic, as far as that goes. But it was really kind of interesting because Jackie Gleason, I listened to that broadcast, and he was intelligent. I mean, it wasn't like I know the difference. I've had a couple experiences where I've had nothing, where especially if I do a mainstream radio, where I have people who have pretty much just contempt, okay? But Jackie Gleason did not have contempt. He was a skeptic, and we all can appreciate skeptics. Skepticism is okay. It's okay, and I always tell everybody, hey, skepticism is okay. You're only one sighting away from being a believer. So talk to me in 15 years, and as far as your skepticism. But there's a difference between contempt and I thought it was pretty neat because Jack Gleason was a earnest skeptic, not like trying to make fun of or but I've seen interviews where some of the people would kind of raise their eyebrows and things like that, but my uncle would just stick to his guns and just speak his truth. Yeah.
Well, that is really a cool story because not a lot of people can back in those days would even come out and say anything that they liked the subject of UFOs, but that Jackie Gleason would speak to the president. I mean, how cool is that? And it sort of makes sense now that you're talking about Julie Nixon Eisenhower liking UFOs because,
she may have known something. There. Yeah, she may have known something. And there was an explosion, especially after there were two groups that were doing some channeling. My uncle actually led his own group every Friday, and so he was a very regular person with that whole exercise. But then I hear about the group of 9, which was done by a group, and that was right after 47. And then we have all the Jack Parsons and what have you. So there's a lot of metaphysical contact, and at the same time, we were doing all of this nuclear testing, which I think if you were just from a practical nature looking out, seeing some activity of this magnitude on planet Earth, you would probably want to have some sort of inquiry and go look. So the activity after Roswell and all that stuff, and it really exploded, and it just kept on it kind of peaks and glows, and right now we're kind of having an increased peak in sightings. Now we went through a lull for a few years, but there's some time periods where there's more and more, and that was one of the times they were just all over. Yeah.
Wow. Well, one of the other things that I read about your uncle that just really impressed me a lot was he was really on the cutting edge of research, talking about cell rejuvenation and free energy, and he even was the inspiration to physicists and scientists around the world, you know, like you were talking about. So for him to have that kind of knowledge, I mean, honestly, that also had to be another proving point for his skeptics.
Yeah, you know, I did you know, I've kind of kicked around the oil and gas business. I've been, I've ran oil and gas and mineral exploration, you know, firms. And so we're always out looking for money for various things. And we had a geophysical company and project, you know, encompassed about 300,000 acres out in Nevada, Great Basin. And so we went to did a presentation at Morton Thiokol, which is in Utah, which is, you know, they build rockets out there. That's what they do. And I swear I had the most, you know, I've had one of those George Van Tassel moments, one of the many I've had, where I'm sitting here in a conference room and some guy's looking at me and he just says, you know, he starts probing me as far as who I am, where I came from. And I didn't want to, you know, back in the day, I didn't want to get into the whole thing with my uncle because it just diverted from what I wanted to do, which was sell him some, you want to get his money in the deal to do some geophysical exploration. And so anyways, he kind of kept on asking me, where are you from? I said, oh, California. He said, oh, where in California? And I said, well, a place near Palm Springs. You wouldn't know where it's at. And I said, well, he said, well, what was it called? I said, well, it was called a place called Landers, California. It's about 42 miles northeast. He said, oh, really? Where's that? You know, there's a place called Giant Rock. I said, yeah, I lived out there. He said, yeah, I knew this man, a very impressive man. The most impressive man I've ever met in my whole life. His name was George Van Tassel. And I look, and I had my geologist and I had my vice president, and I just looked at them. I said, well, I don't think we're going to sell much here. Anyway, so the conversation went for about 2.5 hours, and he just told me, he says, I'm so happy to meet you. He says, you don't know. He says, I would be doing this had I not met your uncle. And so you know, I've seen that so many instances, and I'm thinking, well, that's pretty cool. You know, I mean, that really is cool because you know, when you're close relative to somebody, you know, you don't really have, I guess, you know, they're just kind of more or less family, you know, and I don't think you have an appreciation. But as years went by, I really had a real deep and abiding, appreciation for his talents and his intellect and his just brilliance. You know, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. But, you know, talking about the history of the giant rock, the Native Americans called it a sacred stone.
Yes.
And so it really did have a long history. What did your Uncle George think that the rock had? Did he think it had some kind of power to draw in extraterrestrials?
Yeah, he did, and actually, I mean, I know for a fact it did too, because I used to play down there, and I'm really, you know, I'm very, very, you know, along with, I'm very, very psychically receptive, and all that, all the mineralization, and just visualize. You know, get a big rock, get a big boulder outside the backyard. Just picture yourself being inside of it for any length of time, being wrapped around this mineralization, all these crystals and things like that. And it acted as a conductor, and it really did. And the Indians had a deep appreciation. They actually, it revered so much that really only the leaders of the various tribes in the area would actually meet there and settle things and have kind of a ritual. So it was revered back then with the indigenous Native Americans, you know. So there was a lot of energy out there, and you know, a lot of really great innovative energy, which actually kind of goes to the next thing, which is integratron, which is what you talked about, the cell rejuvenation machine, and you know, that was something that it's still in operation now. Two ladies own it from San Francisco, and they actually keep it open and maintain it. And so people go out there and take sound baths and actually feel much, much better. So there's some healing properties in that. But that was designed, again, it was kind of a thing where he just wanted to, he was working all the way up to his death to get that thing fully operational. And actually had a double meaning too, is that he was involved in time travel and this Project Looking Glass and all this advanced stuff. I mean, it's just really crazy. I talked to this neurosurgeon who his dad used to work directly with my Uncle George, and they were pretty close on some of the stuff, and eventually, I guess, a group threatened this man's dad because they thought that they were getting pretty close, and I guess there's some rivalry within the various areas. It gets kind of this cloak and dagger X-File type thing, which I didn't really have any deep appreciation back then, but apparently that was occurring. There's a lot of really weird stuff going on with all this technology gathering and rivalries and things like that. But
oh yeah, the early contactees had various intelligence agencies breathing down their neck.
Yeah.
So I imagine that your uncle had a few run-ins with them as well, especially with the type of knowledge that he was, pulling up. I mean, it had to be unreal.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, too. Howard Hughes, who's a friend of his, of course, everyone knows the Spruce Goose was made without any metal. Well, the Integratron was built without any metal. And also, too, eventually Hughes, is in fact today still the leader in satellite technology. And so they were pulling stuff out of the, And there's so much technology that was pulled that we've literally advanced light years ahead, not only of our own civilization, but of course any of our competitors, vis-a-vis other countries and things like that. I mean, things like the computer chip and things like various fiber optics. When you go try to find out who invented all that stuff, it becomes very murky because no one can take credit for patents. So we think it was kind of an MG. I've come to the conclusion that Majestic 12 was distributing that stuff to Bell Labs and what have you. But some of the people that were getting that information were my uncle, and I think that had something to do with Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes used to fly out all the way up until he went kind of really bonkers. Up until about 1963, he was kind of coming out there quite a bit. He'd fly his plane out there. And of course, I'd see, as a little kid, I'd see all kinds of, I'd see military helicopters, planes, military people. Of course, back in the day, everyone smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, nonstop. You'd go in that restaurant, and I couldn't breathe, because they were just sitting there yakking about that. But I see these military guys in uniform, and I'd say, "Wow, what are you guys doing here? What?" And
that was quite a gathering.
Yeah. Well, these guys would be seeing these sightings, and they'd want to talk to George because at the time he was probably the person maybe in the world to talk about this kind of thing, and so and what would happen is you get you get a very traditional person, red, white, and blue, goes to church on Sunday, then all of a sudden he sees a couple of spaceships. So a lot of his whole understanding is kind of been rocked a little bit, or at least is stretched, and so it's caused some people a lot of mental problems. I mean, really, it just does, because it's such a different to what they're used to. And so my uncle would just they'd say, go talk to him, because they couldn't go talk to their superiors, because what would have happened if they were an airline pilot, they'd be dismissed, military, they'd be demoted, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I would always wonder why they were there. And I finally found out, talking to the family members of what they were doing out there. And they were basically talking to my uncle about their experience. So, it's kind of good. And so I always tell people, listen, if you need to talk to somebody about any of this stuff, you call me or you talk to me. I leave my email. I get right back to people if they, have had an experience they don't understand. Maybe I can help them, and of course, I wouldn't charge a nickel for it. Just part of my legacy, and that's what my uncle did too. So,
Well, that is something really great that he passed on to you, because I found out interviewing abductees that they are just starving to be able to talk to someone about it and not be ridiculed. And that's why I do this radio show, is because back when I was 12 years old and my father saw a UFO and I said, we got to report this, he said, no, they'll think that we're crazy.
Right.
So it's very important. I think that there are people out there like yourself and many others that keep that channel open for people to talk about such stuff.
Well, also too, and that is in part. I mean, obviously there's, as far as there's an economic reason for the movie. We think this is a $1 billion franchise. We think people are just thirsting for this kind of, really quality programming. But also too, I wanted to get it kind of more mainstream because. Although there's been an explosion of wonderful shows like yours, and there's Coast to Coast and various shows and all this stuff, and they really provide a valuable service. What I want to do is get more of a mainstream look at it and just get people to think about that, and just in case they do encounter that, people should know. And I think and in fact, many government officials have said for 20, 30 years that they need to get the information out, and that we got to stop this game that's being played by our governments. And I think
thank you for saying that. Yes,
we need to get it out. And so what I've been fighting with, and sure, I've liked Men in Black. That's a really it's a cute show, but that makes everything kind of like a joke. And I like Independence Day. Again, that's kind of a comedic type thing. So really what Giant Rock the movie is, it's really the antithesis of that. It's going to show people, it's going to excite people and make them marvel, all that stuff. But what it's going to do is they're going to remember what that movie's about, and then maybe they'll want to go out and do a little research on George Van Tassel, maybe want to do a little research on some of this other stuff going on that, maybe take them at a different place. And so that's what, that's the secret behind and why it's going to get done, and why I think it'll be successful, because it's just pure time for it to come out. Yeah.
Well, I know it's not easy making a movie. I actually got to be in as an extra in a movie one time, and I thought, who would want to do this? This really sucks. It takes all day to get, scenes and stuff like that. Could you talk a little bit about the trials and tribulations of making an independent film?
Well, obviously you have to deal with the studios, and, as far as the cost of doing a production, of course, the cost of getting, A-list stars. And really, in order to get any kind of international distribution, which we think that this movie will do probably 3 times as well in other countries because of the subject matter. We know the numbers are growing. We look at the data, but yeah, I figure, you have an A-list celebrity, they're going to want maybe $10 million or something like that for their part of it, and they certainly deserve it, because what it'll do is people will say, oh, I want a show with Leonardo DiCaprio, or I want to watch a show with Matt Damon, or et cetera, or Penelope Cruz, or some of these people. They'll say, yeah, they can recognize, who those are. So you got to have them for distribution, because without distribution, no one, however, I'm breaking a lot of rules nowadays, so it's kind of, it's really, we're kind of coming out as a little bit as our own little distribution, because I've been able to get out and find pockets of shows like you, and give the heads up as far as that, and those are ad dollars that the studios or distribution are not going to have to spend, and usually what you see is the newspapers, et cetera, et cetera. So we're breaking a lot of rules, but it's also too, you have to fight what people think that they know. One thing I've learned is that no one knows anything in the entertainment business. That's and opinions are like, they don't know anything. I mean, and
thank you for saying that as well, because you're exactly right. They have a whole different concept, I think, than a lot of independent filmmakers have about movies.
Yeah. Well, and it's a rapidly changing market right now. The studios and distributors, they're pandering to foreign markets, because that's where they're making most of their money. In fact, a lot of shows they'll do, used to be, you just give the rights away to the foreign markets. Now you'd be insane to, because you'd be giving away most of your profit. So yeah, there are challenges too. I mean, and of course, heck, you get into all kinds of rivalries with egos and all this other stuff. It is, and it's tough. And then the reputation in itself of the movies, because there have been a lot of skullduggery, a lot of really crazy people, expensing yachts and Ferraris to their movie budgets, and it's just a different. They're not like us. They look at everything completely different. They figure, well, they figure if they write a check and they put it on their balance sheet of the movie for a Ferrari, that's not stealing.
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised a couple of years ago when I watched a movie called Monsters by Gareth Edwards, who I think his budget was $1 million, and he shot the whole movie basically from his laptop. And he took all of his, he used extras for his movie and all that kind of stuff, and he broke a lot of ground because, as you know now, he's got like this movie, it's Godzilla, which was actually really great. So I think being innovative and doing things like this, I think it's smart.
It is. It really is, and the democracy too of technology that has opened up things like this too. It's not film now; it's mainly video, and so and I keep talking to people. And I have a group of Chinese investors. So they say, "Well," says, "you're going to be a first-time director." I says, "Well, we're a little nervous about that and all that." And I said, "Well, one, I wrote the screenplay. Number one, I the shots are in my brain. I know what this thing's supposed to look like." I said, in fact, I'm talking to a director, maybe some co-director. He's done quite a bit. And some of the I like his work. Actually, approached me to co-direct on this thing here. So I'm completely open to it. But you're trying to explain to people what you have, and they have these preconceived ideas that Marty Scorsese should always direct, or Steven Spielberg, or something, and they're all wonderful people. But my biggest concern is that I will not give up creative control, because I have, of course, these legacy issues, but also too is this story is, if you read the screenplay, it reads so quick that you'll basically, and especially it's perfect for film. There's not a lot needs to be done. Just need to get out there and do it. But it's going to take money, and I'm out there, spend most of my time. I don't think I'll know how to act once I have all my budget completed, and I can basically have the luxury of working 18-hour days to get my. I look forward to it. As far as this, I prefer.
Well,
yeah.
What a chance of a lifetime, honestly, to be able to do this and to continue giving the gift that your uncle George Van Tassel gave back then, for it to be enjoyed by other generations. I just don't think there's anything more cool than that.
I have to agree, and don't think for a minute that I don't realize this every single day, Deborah. You just hit the nail on the head. It is a privilege and an honor to do this. Really it is. And I'm thinking I was kind of like a little either a time bomb or time machine, you call it whatever you want. I think I was programmed to do this back in the day. I think for me to do, I think it's kind of like a baton twist. I say, well, I know I'm going to die in 1978, Chad, so maybe in 2014, 2015 we'll get the message out again. So I kind of feel honored in that way. Yeah.
Well, I do think it's your destiny. That you were there and that you saw this stuff, and like you said, it's imprinted in your brain. I don't think anybody could do this better, and I, for one, as someone who loves movies and being able to see this story come to life, from the minute I saw it, I thought, this is going to be a different kind of movie. This is not going to be like some of your glossy, smoothed over movies that just are more interested in special effects than the actual storyline and the backstory. So yeah. I am very excited about this.
Mm-hmm. I am too, and you're right. I think, I love special effects. I love visual effects, but they need to support the story. You want to have, it has to fit right in that whole thing so you can at least see what it is. And really to entertain, to capture somebody's imagination, hopefully for maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes, is something, something that you're entrusted with. And there is no way in hell that I'm not going to have every single second of that for the audience to enjoy and to welcome them into my world, because this is my chance to have them participate in my life, and they're going to get it through my eyes. I'm telling you, they really will. Yeah.
Well, can you drop any names yet of actors that might be in the
Well,
movie?
I mean, I would put, it changes, and it's funny. Originally we wanted to. I actually envisioned. Actually, I wrote one scene specifically for Penelope Cruz. There's one character, her name, a Hispanic lady named Sonia Ortiz in our thing, and I actually wrote it with her in mind. But you never know who you can get as far as the time, what have you. Another person I would consider for that would be Jessica Alba, who she's the demographics would fit, and she would fit the
great choices.
Yeah.
Choices. I love both those ladies.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, as far as we've looked at, I sit there and looked at all kinds of things. There's a person that. We would love to have. We would really truly love to have Matt Damon as George. I think he would probably fit. Leonardo DiCaprio would also fit. They also love renewable and sustainable and environmental issues and things like that, which my uncle was a big proponent of also. So they'd be great fits.
Well, Matt Damon was a big fan of Bob Lazar, and at one time he was actually hoping to get to play Bob in a movie.
Yes. So
yes, Matt Damon would be a great choice.
He really would, and it's always good to be involved with people who have passion for your subject matter and what have you. So those are some, but we've looked at. There's a gentleman named Rudolph Martin. He's actually signed a letter of interest to play. Frank Kreisler, and he actually is a German. He comes from Germany, and he's played in General Hospital. He's played on a couple of the fairly shows. He's not really a well-known actor, but literally the amazing thing about it is I wrote his name down when because what I do is I sit there and look at pictures and look at movies and say, I think he'd be good there. And I wrote his name down about 2 years, and lo and behold, the person he contacted me out of the blue. And I talked.
Oh my gosh, Chad! Oh my gosh, that is incredible.
Yeah, so he contacted me out of the blue. But there's a whole bunch of it's when you talk about the budget, it's an era piece. So we go from and we have a lot of different characters in that interacting with my Uncle George, as far as the character of Uncle George and what have you. So that's a big part. A big portion of the money is going to go towards actors, just because we have the people, and it's an era piece. So we're taking the first one from 30 to 1963. Then the sequel, of course, will be from 63 to 2012, and then from 2012 to onwards as far as that. But it's an era piece, so it is a little bit pricier as far as do that. So the first budget was $15 million. Everyone says that we couldn't get it done for that. Then it went up to 30. Now the Chinese, they came back and says, well, I think that's too small amount. You ought to put it around 40. They had some, guys looking. I said, well, you know what? Show up with the $40 million, and I'll make a budget.
That's an offer they can't refuse. I hope.
Right. What are you trying to do? Tickle me? I mean, but I would prefer. And the thing about it is I've had to literally travel around the world to get money, and it's so funny because we've had such a hard time with the local people and we don't understand why that is, but I think it's maybe our economy's bad or something, because or there's some, the first thing people say, well, are you going to sell the foreign rights? I said, hell no, I'm not going to sell the foreign rights. I'd rather give it my right leg, as far as to sell the foreign rights. We'll do better over it. Everyone has this prescribed method, and so we just, always wanted to have, local, had this been done 30 years ago, I think I'd have had the money in no time, because, a lot of the people were still alive, but since then I'm one of the last people that have any connection with the whole area and the time period. So we've lost a lot of the real core supporters just through death and attrition and what have you, and what have you. So we just haven't had the domestic support financially. We'd love to, but you know what? We live in it's really a worldwide phenomenon. The numbers, 56% of the people worldwide believe in extraterrestrial life. So it's going to be their movie too. And it should be too, because this is not just about this is not just about California. It's not just about Arizona or Tennessee or North Carolina. This is an Earth issue.
You're exactly right. It is an Earth issue, and your uncle was, even back then, he was, talking about free energy and things that a lot of people, scientists, are trying to get implemented today and to put on the forefront to save planet Earth from destroying itself. So I do hope you get a lot of support, and you can just be guaranteed that my show will promote your movie and we'll talk about it, because it's really, of all the movies that I've read that are in production right now, I think yours is in the forefronter to be a major blockbuster, because the world is hungry to get the real story behind all this stuff.
Oh, thank you, dear. I appreciate it. It's very, very kind of you to do that and to help us out. We you know what? Listen, we need help from just about everybody, and I'm not one thing about it. I'm not bashful from accepting any help from anybody. So,
that's how you have to be when you stand behind. Do you have a release date in mind for your movie?
I think we're talking about 2016 now is a release date. As far as that, it'll take us, from the minute we have the budget to start, it'll be 2 years. So that's pretty much where we're at now.
Would you like to tell everybody, if they want to get in contact you, where they can reach you, and if you have a website or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. Of course, go to our website and Facebook. It's all GiantRockTheMovie.com and Giant Rock the Movie Facebook. And then if anyone needs to get a hold of me personally, my email is chad@GiantRockTheMovie.com. I'll get right back with you, as far as on that. But yeah, and if you Google my name, it'll come up. We've got I think 50 pages of Google. We're so you can find me, but quickest way to get hold of me directly is chad@GiantRockTheMovie.com. But, go to our website, go to our Facebook, like us, love us, just pay attention to us, keep us in mind, keep us in your prayers, whatever you do, your meditation, just send all the good energy you can to us. We really need it and appreciate it.
Well, Chad, it has certainly been a pleasure having you on my show, and I hope everybody out there will just keep a watch on the movie updates and everything, and maybe in about 6 months or so we'll have you back on and you can let us know how it's going, because I, for one, want to know. So I can imagine all the readers and that are reading about it, and the listeners will want to know as well. So thank you so much for being a guest, and
absolutely.
Best wishes for your show.
Thank you, Deborah. It's been my pleasure. I look forward to coming back.
This is Deborah Jane East from Skywatcher Radio, and we thank you for listening, and tune in next week for another show. Take care, everyone. Bye.
You've been listening to Skywatcher Radio Show.
Is there anybody out there?
If you'd like to be a guest on the show, contact us through our website, skywatcherradio.com, or on our Facebook page.